He had everything. A revolutionary device, a passionate team, a head start that could have changed the entire history of smartphones. But Palm didn't become Apple. And what happened next is one of the most tragic ironies in tech history. Because Palm could have been the iPhone before iPhone ever existed. In the early 2000s, Silicon Valley was buzzing with one big question. What would replace a computer? The internet was exploding, mobile phones were shrinking, and a handful of visionaries were already whispering about a future where everything you could do on a desktop could fit inside your pocket. Among those visionaries was Palm, a company that, for a brief and brilliant moment, stood at the very edge of that future. Palm wasn't just another gadget maker. They defined the handheld computing era. Their PalmPilot had already become a cultural phenomenon, the digital notepad of choice for professionals, tech enthusiasts, and early adopters. People were writing memos, checking contacts, even syncing their calendars to desktop computers. In the late 90s and early 2000s, owning a Palm device meant you were living in the future. It was elegant, simple, and intuitive everything technology was supposed to be, but Palm didn't stop there. They wanted more. They wanted to make a device that would merge the functionality of a computer with the connectivity of a phone, a true smart device long before the word smartphone ever entered the mainstream. So, in 2002, they unveiled something truly remarkable, the Palm Treo. On the surface, it looked like just another small gadget with a tiny keyboard and a simple display. But beneath that modest design was a breakthrough, a product so ahead of its time that it could have rewritten history. The Treo had email integration. You could send and receive messages in real time, at a time when most phones couldn't even open a proper text document. It had a touchscreen, something that felt like science fiction back then. You could tap, scroll, and navigate without a physical mouse or stylus. It had a web browser, letting users check websites and news on the go. In an era when most people still thought mobile internet meant WAP text pages and pixelated weather reports. And perhaps most astonishingly, it had an app store prototype. Palm's developers were already experimenting with third-party applications, little downloadable tools that could expand what the device could do. This was 5 years before Apple would announce the iPhone. 5 years before the word App Store would become synonymous with digital gold. Palm had built the blueprint for what we now call the modern smartphone. Inside Palm's offices, the atmosphere was electric. The engineers knew they were onto something big, something that could redefine communication, computing, and even culture. But there was a problem. While the engineers were dreaming about the future, the executives were staring at the past. Palm's leadership saw the Treo not as the dawn of a new era, but as a risky bet. They believed the world wasn't ready for a full mobile computer. To them, phones were still for calling, PDAs were still for note-taking, and merging the two felt unnecessary, even dangerous. And so, they treated the Treo like just another product, not a revolution. They didn't market it as a life-changing technology. They didn't build an ecosystem around it. And they didn't push the design or software refinements that could have made it irresistible to everyday consumers. Yet, for the people who used it, the small, loyal group of early adopters, the Treo felt magical. It could send emails, browse the internet, store music, and even take pictures. It was everything a smartphone would later become, just without the polished hype and storytelling power of Apple. It was a computer in your pocket, before anyone realized that's what they wanted. But Palm, blinded by their own success in the PDA market, couldn't see it. They were still thinking like a hardware company in an era that was shifting towards software ecosystems. They had built the technology of the future, but were trapped in the business model of the past. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was slowly catching up. Mobile technology was evolving, but not fast enough to see what was coming. Nokia, the undisputed king of phones, ruled every pocket and purse. Their devices were durable, reliable, and stylish in their simplicity. Everyone either owned a Nokia or wanted one. The company's connecting people slogan wasn't just marketing, it was reality. Nokia had perfected the phone, but they weren't thinking beyond it. Their devices made calls, sent texts, maybe played a bit of Snake. But the idea of the phone as a computer, that was still too radical, too far-fetched for their boardrooms in Finland. Then there was BlackBerry, the darling of Wall Street, the badge of corporate power. Its tiny keyboard and blinking red notification light became symbols of success. Executives were addicted to it. It wasn't just a phone, it was a lifestyle. For a while, BlackBerry looked unstoppable. But even they saw the mobile world through the lens of emails and encryption, not evolution. They built walls around their ecosystem, keeping their technology exclusive to a loyal few, never realizing that the future wasn't exclusivity, but accessibility. And then came Microsoft, lumbering into the mobile space with its early versions of Windows Mobile. These devices were bulky, confusing, and built on a system that never quite worked as smoothly as it should. Microsoft saw the smartphone as a shrunken computer, not a reimagined one. Their software tried to cram the desktop experience into a tiny screen, forgetting that mobility required simplicity. So while Nokia perfected the phone, BlackBerry mastered business communication, and Microsoft forced Windows into your palm. Palm had already created something that merged all of it: touchscreen navigation, real internet browsing, seamless email and messaging, even basic apps. Years before the term app economy existed, Palm wasn't following the trend. They were defining it. They had cracked a formula that everyone else was still trying to solve. How to make a mobile device feel like a computer without making it complicated. But instead of leading with confidence, Palm hesitated. They refined what didn't need refining. They tweaked what was already revolutionary. They second-guessed decisions that should have been bold steps forward. Inside the company, debates raged. Should they stay loyal to their PDA roots or leap fully into the world of mobile computing? Should they invest in software ecosystems or continue relying on hardware margins? Every delay was a missed opportunity. Every compromise chipped away at their advantage. And while Palm argued over strategy, others were watching. Competitors studied their innovations closely: the user interface, the stylus-free design, the integration of touch and connectivity. Palm had unintentionally given the industry a preview of what was possible. It's almost painful to look back now, because they were sitting on gold, real gold. They had the hardware, they had the vision, they even had the cult following. Tech journalists praised their devices. Developers admired their forward thinking. Early adopters loved how intuitive the Treo felt compared to anything else on the market. But inside Palm's boardroom, excitement turned to uncertainty. Instead of acting like pioneers, they started behaving like caretakers, guarding what they had instead of building what they could become. They became conservative in an industry that was about to explode with risk takers. And the tragedy wasn't that Palm didn't know what to do. It's that they knew exactly what to do, but lost the courage to do it. They had a 5-year lead, a global reputation, a loyal audience ready for whatever came next. But rather than push forward into the smartphone age, Palm slowed down. They overanalyzed, overplanned, and underestimated how quickly innovation moves when the world starts paying attention. Because while Palm was busy questioning their own brilliance, others were quietly preparing to perfect it. And soon, one company in Cupertino would take that same dream, the dream Palm had first, and turn it into a cultural revolution. And in a few short years, that hesitation would cost them everything. Because while Palm was debating the future, Apple was quietly building it. Inside Palm's offices, meetings stretched for hours, not about innovation, but about risk management. Every new idea came with a spreadsheet. Every bold suggestion was met with a question. But will it sell this quarter? Palm's leadership was trapped in a corporate rhythm, one that prioritized immediate profits over long-term vision. They wanted the next device out quickly, cheaply, and safely. But safe is the slowest way to die in technology. Meanwhile, a few hundred miles away in Cupertino, something entirely different was happening. In 2004, Apple was riding high on the success of the iPod. Millions of people carried one in their pocket, and with it, they carried a piece of Apple's brand. Sleek, aspirational, emotional. Steve Jobs understood something Palm never truly grasped. Technology wasn't just about function, it was about feeling. He didn't want to make gadgets. He wanted to make experiences. And while Palm's engineers were polishing features and arguing over specs, Apple's designers were sketching the future of touch. They weren't trying to improve the phone. They were trying to redefine it. Palm's greatest weakness wasn't its technology, it was its mindset. They were engineers trying to build products. Apple was storytellers building worlds. Palm designed devices to work. Apple designed devices to wow. And that single difference, that cultural gap, would decide everything. Inside Palm, some engineers could sense it. They saw the shift coming. They knew the industry was about to change forever. They pushed for riskier ideas. Full-screen touch interfaces, integrated software ecosystems, new operating systems that could rival a desktop's power. But management didn't see the urgency. They still believed the PDA could coexist with the phone. That incremental updates would be enough to stay relevant. They didn't realize that evolution was about to become revolution. Every time an engineer pitched a daring prototype, the same words echoed back. Too early, too expensive, too risky. The irony? Those were the exact same fears every other company would soon conquer. By the mid-2000s, the warning signs were flashing. Sales had slowed. Consumers were starting to crave design, not just function. The Treo, once revolutionary, now looked old-fashioned next to sleeker, minimalist devices. Palm's brand, once synonymous with innovation, was turning into nostalgia. Yet they kept doing the same thing. Small improvements, mild redesigns, cautious marketing. The fire that once fueled them had turned into a checklist. And then in 2005, word started spreading through the valley. Apple was working on something secret. A project so confidential that even most Apple employees didn't know about it. Internally, it was called Project Purple. Rumors trickled out. A touchscreen device, no physical buttons, capable of browsing the web, sending messages and running applications. Sound familiar? It was Palm's dream. Only this time, it had Apple's obsession with perfection behind it. And while Palm dismissed it as just another rumor, Apple was testing prototypes that would change the world. Palm had the advantage. They'd been there first. They had the technology, the know-how, and the loyal base. But they lacked what Apple had, a unified vision. At Apple, every department, from engineering to design to marketing, moved in sync with one mission: build the best product possible, no matter the cost. At Palm, departments competed. Visions clashed. Short-term decisions killed long-term dreams. They weren't thinking like Apple. Apple believed in storytelling through simplicity. Palm believed in specifications through complexity. Apple built anticipation. Palm built revisions. Apple created emotion. Palm created features. And in the tech world, emotion always wins. While Palm debated what was too early, Apple prepared to be right on time. And the moment Steve Jobs walked onto that stage in 2007, holding a small black rectangle that combined a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator, Palm's engineers watched in silence because they recognized it instantly. It was a future they had dreamed of, the one they'd already built, but never believed in enough to release. The company had one of the smartest engineers in Silicon Valley, Jeff Hawkins, a quiet genius, the kind of mind that doesn't just design gadgets, but redefines how humans interact with machines. Hawkins wasn't your typical corporate engineer. He was a thinker, almost philosophical about technology. To him, devices weren't supposed to be flashy toys or corporate trophies. They were supposed to extend human intelligence. He had already changed the world once before. In the late 1990s, when most people were still using paper planners and pocket calendars, Hawkins invented the PalmPilot, a small gray rectangle that could store your contacts, your notes, your schedule, and even sync with your computer. It was simple, elegant, and addictive. The PalmPilot became the ultimate digital companion, years before smartphones existed. Businessmen, students, doctors, everyone wanted one. It was more than a product. It was a statement. Jeff Hawkins had done something extraordinary. He made people trust a computer small enough to fit in their hands. And yet, he knew this was only the beginning. To Hawkins, the PalmPilot wasn't the final destination. It was the first step. He saw where the world was going long before most people did. The lines between phones, computers, and personal assistants were starting to blur. He believed the future wasn't about smaller devices, it was about smarter ones. He used to say it plainly with quiet conviction: we're building computers for your pocket. A simple statement that carried an entire philosophy. He wasn't just talking about hardware. He was talking about the birth of a new species of computing, one that would live with you, move with you, think with you. He wanted to create a device that would merge communication, productivity, and intelligence, something that could learn from you and adapt to your life. Sound familiar? It's almost eerie now, because years later, that very sentence, computers for your pocket, will become the heartbeat of Apple's iPhone philosophy. But inside Palm, not everyone saw what Hawkins saw. His vision of the future clashed with the company's growing obsession with the present. Palm's leadership had shifted from dreamers to managers, people more interested in quarterly profits than long-term revolutions. They weren't asking, what's next? They were asking, what sells? Instead of doubling down on research and design, they started cutting corners. Devices were rushed out faster, built cheaper, marketed safer. The Treo, Hawkins' brainchild, was selling. But executives wanted more, faster. They wanted to dominate the PDA market, not redefine it. And that's the tragedy. Palm wasn't struggling because of bad technology. Their technology was years ahead. They were struggling because of fear. Fear of losing what they already had. Fear of being too early. Fear of risking success for something uncertain. Hawkins tried to push them forward. He argued that mobile computing was the next great frontier, that whoever controlled it would control the next generation of tech. But his warnings fell on deaf ears. The board didn't want another revolution. They wanted another PalmPilot. So, rather than build the future, they milked the past. They scaled production, cut innovation budgets, and told the engineers to focus on stability. In Silicon Valley terms, that's another way of saying don't dream too big. And that's where the fracture began. While Hawkins was sketching the blueprint for a connected, intelligent handheld computer, the executives were calculating margins on plastic casings. He was thinking in decades. They were thinking in quarters. It wasn't a difference of opinion. It was a difference of vision. Palm had the chance to lead the mobile revolution from the front lines, but instead, they became spectators to their own creation. They didn't see it, the revolution that was staring right at them, because in their pursuit of now, they missed the next. And that single misalignment between a visionary engineer and a cautious boardroom would quietly set the stage for one of the greatest missed opportunities in tech history. And here's where it gets almost cruelly ironic. The man who gave Palm its very identity, the mind behind their greatest success, walked away. Jeff Hawkins, frustrated and disillusioned, had reached his breaking point. He'd spent years fighting to push Palm forward, to drag it out of the comfort zone of PDAs and into the age of true mobile computing. But each time, he hit the same brick wall, short-term thinking. So he left, and when he did, he took with him not just his ideas, but the very spirit of innovation that had once defined Palm. Together with a few trusted colleagues, Hawkins founded a new company, Handspring. The name said it all. It was about leaping forward, not holding on. Handspring wasn't interested in playing it safe. It wasn't about incremental upgrades or cautious business models. It was about realizing the vision Hawkins had been preaching all along, the one Palm had refused to embrace, a device that truly combined communication, intelligence, and portability. Within a short time, Handspring unveiled the Treo, a device that merged phone, internet, and personal computing into one sleek, compact form. It could make calls. It could browse the web. It could handle email, contacts, music, and even third-party applications. In 2002, this was almost unthinkable. Before Apple ever dreamed of reinventing the phone, Hawkins and his small team had already done it. The Treo wasn't just ahead of its time. It was the future, arriving too soon for the world to fully appreciate it. Tech reviewers couldn't believe what they were seeing. The Wall Street Journal called it the most complete handheld communication device yet. Wired called it revolutionary. But beneath that praise, there was an unspoken truth that made Palm's leadership deeply uncomfortable. The company they'd once dismissed as a spinoff was subtly doing what they should have done years ago. Handspring wasn't just a competitor. It was Palm's mirror, a reflection of what Palm could have been if it had listened to its own visionary. And that realization sparked panic. By the early 2000s, Palm's dominance in the PDA market had begun to slip. Competitors were emerging. The world was shifting toward convergence. Devices that could do everything, not just one thing well. Palm's response? Instead of evolving, instead of learning from Handspring's momentum, they chose control. They bought it back. They acquired Handspring in 2003, not to accelerate innovation, but to reclaim their old identity. On paper, it looks strategic, reuniting two pioneers under one brand. But inside the company, something darker was happening. The same bureaucracy that had driven Hawkins away was still there. The same boardroom debates, the same cautious executives, the same fear of betting too big. And so, once the acquisition papers were signed, Handspring's spark was slowly smothered. Meetings replaced momentum, committees replaced creativity, and the Treo, once a bold, disruptive product, became just another item in Palm's lineup. By 2005, Palm was a company divided against itself. On the outside, they looked stable, releasing new Treo models, holding press events, talking about innovation. But inside, there was chaos. Some teams wanted to rebuild from scratch and create a new mobile operating system that could rival Windows and Apple's growing ambitions. Others argued for licensing existing software to save costs. Every department seemed to have a different vision of what Palm should be. Some wanted to compete with BlackBerry in business communication. Others wanted to chase Apple's design-driven consumer market. And a few still believe in Hawkins' original dream, a true handheld computer built for the next decade, not the last one. But no one could agree. The result? Paralysis. Palm had the technology, the engineers, and the heritage to dominate the mobile future. Yet every decision was slowed by corporate hesitation. While Apple and Google were sketching the outlines of their next great revolutions, Palm was still arguing about what kind of company it wanted to be. The world was moving at the speed of innovation. Palm was drowning in indecision. And the cruelest part? The man who had tried to save them had already built the future they were now too afraid to claim. They had a team of visionaries, brilliant engineers who could see where technology was heading, trapped inside a company that refused to evolve. Palm's creative minds wanted to reinvent the future of mobile computing. They wanted to build something bold, something revolutionary. But every time they looked up, the executives reminded them of budgets, deadlines, and quarterly reports. The boardroom wasn't filled with dreamers. It was filled with people who were afraid to take risks, afraid to challenge the status quo, afraid to think beyond the next product cycle. And as those internal battles brewed, something was happening a few hundred miles away in Cupertino. Steve Jobs was assembling a secret team, designers, engineers, and software architects, to work on a project so confidential that even Apple employees didn't know what it was. They called it Project Purple. Its goal was simple but world-changing: to merge the power of a computer with the portability of a phone. And here's the part that stings. Palm was already there. Before Apple ever announced the iPhone, Palm's engineers had built an early multi-touch smartphone prototype. It wasn't just a concept sketch or a rough idea. It worked. It had the foundations of everything modern smartphones would later become: touch interaction, seamless internet access, and the ability to run dynamic applications. Excited, the engineers took it to the board. They believed this could redefine the company, the chance to put Palm years ahead of anyone else. But when they pitched the idea, the response was devastating. Too risky, one executive said. Too complicated, another added. Then came the final nail. We're a PDA company, not a computer company. That was the moment Palm's future began to die. Not because of a lack of innovation, but because of fear. They had in their hands a technology that could have changed everything, and they let it slip away. So while Palm's executives played it safe, Apple's secret team kept pushing forward, testing, refining, perfecting. The irony? Palm had the vision first, but Apple had the courage to believe in it. When Steve Jobs walked onto that stage in 2007 and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone," Palm's engineers reportedly sat in silence because they already built that phone years ago. They just never got permission to release it. And here's the deeper truth most people miss. Palm didn't fail because they were slow. They failed because they didn't believe in their own future. The culture at Palm punished vision and rewarded caution. It was a company full of people who almost changed the world, but were led by those who feared change the most. Then came WebOS, Palm's final attempt at redemption. It was beautiful, fluid, years ahead of Android. Even Steve Jobs reportedly admired it, but it came too late. By then, Apple had the spotlight. Google had the ecosystem. Palm had the right idea at the wrong time. And that's the cruel paradox of innovation. Being early is just another way of being invisible. Palm saw the future first. But Apple made the world believe in it. Because technology alone doesn't win. Belief does. Storytelling does. And leadership the kind that says, we'll take the risk anyway. That's what turns an idea into a revolution. Palm could have been the iPhone before iPhone. But history doesn't remember who almost changed the world. It remembers who did. So here's the question. Do you think Palm's failure was bad timing or bad leadership? Let's talk about it below. And if you found this story worth your time, hit the like button, share it with someone who loves tech stories, and subscribe because 80% of you watching right now still aren't. And in the next story, we'll uncover how another company made the same mistake and lost everything to Apple again.